Slavoj Zizek dismantles Kant's madness. The Hegelian slash Lacanian slash Marxist philosopher who I talk about all the time, Slavoj Zizek, wrote a book about the famous idealist philosopher Hegel's aesthetics called Less Than Nothing. Remember that in my previous video on this book, I got into Zizek's criticism of the philosopher Fichte's thoughts on subjectivity within idealism. In spite of the fact that Zizek is a Hegelian, he harshly criticized both Fichte and Hegel about this subject. He called Hegel crazy, and Fichte far fucking crazier. That's because Fichte went even further with his subjectivity in idealist philosophy. Remember also that idealism is much more closely associated with continental philosophers like Zizek and Hegel than it is with analytic philosophers such as Kant. The supposed divide between continental and analytic philosophy is not always super strict, though, as a lot of people know, since some, like Hegel, are obviously big fans of reason if you know anything about his work. Anyway, Zizek argues that before we dismiss Fichte as the climax of subjectivist madness, we should give the wacko a chance. To understand his path to full idealism, we should bear in mind that Fichte radicalizes the supremacy of practical reason, as Kant had done before. Kant's first critics had already noticed a colossal problem in his practical philosophy. This was his ambiguous relationship between the categorical imperative as the quote unquote fact of reason and the principles of full practical reason. I used to come to the wrong conclusion based on Kant's famous thought experiment of telling the truth to a Nazi who asks whether you're hiding a Jew in your basement when you are hiding. I was led to believe that the categorical imperative basically means don't lie. But to oversimplify, it actually means that society should have a widely accepted moral rule. It's usually something such as follow reason, but it doesn't have to be specifically that. It's just a way that society can choose to behave. Y'all know I have countless fundamental issues with reason, but it tends to be generally good. We don't need to get into all that here. In terms of Fichte's hazy connection between Kant's categorical imperative and the postulates of pure practical reason, some examples of postulates include the immortality of the soul and the existence of God. So, Fichte's ambiguous exploration, I should say, of our supposedly immortal souls and God's supposed existence as society's categorical imperative fails. God and our souls as principles of pure practical reason does not work as the foundation for the categorical imperative. To Fichte and Kant, our moral image of the world alone makes moral acts meaningful. Put simply, our moral compasses are what give our moral acts meaning. That makes sense, but it's pretty obvious. However, if you're using this to assert that there actually is objective morality based on reason in the world, it's bankrupt logic. Kant and Fichte are just saying that our behavior in the world is objectively moral and based on reason. Clearly, there's no evidence that people behave based on reason. Countless philosophers have pointed this out throughout human history, but David Hume was one of the analytic philosophers who fucking skewered the notion that people behave based on reason, even though he was an analytic philosopher and a fan of reason in general. I've also mentioned my favorite post-structuralists like Foucault and Derrida deconstructing objective knowledge and truth many times. To Kant, we have to accept that our reality is already structured in a way that will allow us to achieve our practical goals and build a better world. Kant argues that these postulates behind our moral compasses are not as direct and unconditional as our moral awareness of the categorical imperative. Our reasoning of the cognitive implications of the moral awareness of the categorical imperative results in these principles behind the way we morally see the world. Our moral awareness of the categorical imperative is more direct and unconditional. It indirectly and conditionally allows us to set up secondary postulates of reason behind the way we morally view reality. So, Zizek deconstructs the madness of Fichte's subjectivity and idealism and Kant's categorical imperative. Fichte radicalized the power of practical reason, but Kant's first critics had already caught the fundamental flaws with this approach. There's a fucking hazy connection between the principles of practical reason and our moral awareness of the categorical imperative. Remember, the categorical imperative is an almost ubiquitously accepted moral rule for society, such as follow reason or don't lie. Zizek reminds us that the postulates of pure practical reason are not truly connected to the categorical imperative. This means that our moral compasses are not actually based on reason. Kant uses this to justify the categorical imperative, showing objective moral truth based on behavior inspired by reason. This totally fucking fails. Philosophers from Hume to the ancient Greek Heraclitus destroyed reason. Post-structuralists like Derrida and Foucault, among countless others, caused the notion of objective truth to implode. To Kant, our world is designed in a way that allows us to fulfill our goals. It also allows societies to innovate and thrive. However, behaving based on reason and arriving at objective knowledge is based on fundamentally flawed logic. Since these are associated with the categorical imperative, it defeats the categorical imperative itself. But even if we grant that a categorical imperative in general works, Fichte and Kant's claim that an example of the categorical imperative can be, quote, behave based on reason and gain objective knowledge, unquote, is completely unfounded bullshit. Slavoj Zizek dismantles Kant's madness!